ebusiafo na etiefo ni de kwan so mema obibia akwa baba channel bacha hi daily update tv obo kwan so say na no first time baba channel semester so share video ni we na so we you be subscribe to your YouTube channel no be like no share video sama wadofo nso anya bi ahwe nyakopo ncha no nyoke me pacho Benard Mornah na wapia babon tinde insemi abetudwa. That was last week. Yeah, finance minister Oforiata Eco Parliament ana oko reading the budget and as 2024 budget na odiko tudwa na ehun sinsem na aba mankofo bebre react to na ene so na Benard Mornah ejemre ana so react to na wa pontificate holes bi loopholes bi e wo budget ni ne bebi onunu say embra enye mekanisa embra kra na se enye ewo budget mu na we de 1.5 wo yiyi ni nyina aba mako na me pacho ne kasa ne de o kasa che pa yes o kabrofon so ntino menya mense umre kra ye bekoni akutie nsem no se ne wo se kan no na ne submission ye perfect na very very perfect na bi kra ne se o kase since a finance minister, that is the last 4 years, they be parliament a dia or the to budget in it no only jet make us say a dinu naya asante names adentina your friends saying it was a basa Casalmoon so no say Ghana a unitary state intino adentina de bia yani akofa kasaba akope ana yedi name a budget no and you can say basa apart from my non-so can send be brave or can send be pine to the Ubu kwan so said me kind a audio jembre ne ko na yenko ni ko tie nsema Benard Mornah edutudwa nyakopon sha no nyoke se me da se bebre me pa chawo e ma rave says and no first time abacha ni so said e kan na o hwe video ni you na se woni juma be subscribe na se o tie all the ni na se woni juma be subscribe for more updates nyakopon sha no nyoke se o comment bi so a e ma rave so de be share comment section no ye be gene akin kan nyakopon sha no nyoke se me pa chawo yen zoom straight into the audio ni yenko tie nsem no.
Permit me to remind us that Ghana is a unitary state made up of different groupings, different tribes, different religions, and what have you. And it is not for a joke that our national capital, political capital, is centered in the Greater Accra. And so in all the works that we do, we must be conscious and deliberately minded to bring about the sense of unity and togetherness of the various fragments that are pulled together to make the nation called Ghana. Since 2007, that President Akufo-Addo mandated Ken Ofori-Atta as Minister for Finance. 2017. Yeah. It's evident that aside Akan and Achim, nothing matters to the people of Ghana. From what they describe as the 2017 Asempa budget, to the 2018 Ejuma budget, to the 2019 Imputuo budget, to the 2020 Enindasuo budget, to the 2021 Nkoswo budget, to the 2022 Ajenkwa budget, to the 2023 Obantampa budget, and now to the 2024 Nkunim budget. That is not only sectional, but an attack on the sense of cohesion that this nation struggled to come together with. Who doesn't know that there are guns in Ghana? Who doesn't know that there are Dogumbes? Who doesn't know that there are Fantis? Who doesn't know that there are Enzimas? So in presenting the budget statements and in identifying names that are indigenous to the people of Ghana, it cannot be. It cannot be, because by selecting only Akan words, you are further dividing this nation to mean that there are only Akans and that we all understand what you mean. For instance, the Speaker of Parliament is a Dagao. What does Nkunim mean to him? What does that mean? I don't know whether he actually understands Nkunim. And so for 8 years continuous, we have been subdued and pummeled by this kind of thinking. And you see, the sectionalism that is displayed in the names that the budget statement has identifies and defines the character of President Akufo-Addo. Because he mandated and authorized the Minister for Finance to continue to do this, otherwise it will not happen. But you see, if you want the unity of our nation, you will not be engaged in such sectional betrayal of the national cohesion and attempt. That is an aside. Now I have read the 2024 budget statements. And I came across, I'm not a believer of GDP. And I think that everybody knows my stance on that, that I'm not a believer of GDP as a determinant of the health of an economy, particularly a developing economy like ours. I don't believe that when GDP is created, it necessarily translates into the well-being of the people. By my experience, I have lived it. And let me expatiate for you to understand. GDP simply means the aggregation of goods and services produced in a country, irrespective of the nationals that produce them. So the Asians that are in Ghana and what they produce, the Americans that are in Ghana and what they produce, the Arabians that are in Ghana and what they produce, combined with what the Ghanaians produce, when you sum everything up, it will give you the GDP of the country. In the end, you will notice that the chunk of what is produced is not owned by the people of Ghana. And so anytime we calculate GDP in its form, as we do, at the end of the day, that GDP immediately migrates out of the shores of the country. And I'll give you 2 examples. You know this drinking water we call it pure water, bottled water. One of them is called Belaqua. The name will suggest that it's a Ghanaian company. It's an Indian company. So as we produce Belaqua in Ghana and we drink Belaqua, they make so much money. As soon as the money is made, it goes into India. If you go to the telecom sector and take all the telecom providers, which is my favorite example, MTN is not owned by Ghana. You used to have One Touch, Ghana Telecom. You sold it out. And so Vodafone is not owned by Ghana. Glo is not owned by Ghana. Tigo, Airtel is not owned by Ghana. And yet, every day, we spend so much money on data, on voice, and other services. When they gather the money every Friday, you see an MTN plane come and gather the money in dollars and they take it away. Yet, the money generated out of the services they provide is captured as part of the growth in the economy, which is determined in GDP form. So, in effect, anytime you use GDP as a determinant of the health of the economy, you are doing a disservice because that money does not stay in your economy. The people of Ghana own just a paltry percentage of that GDP. And that should be a source of worry. If you go to the oil sector, you own about 13% or less. 87% migrates out of your shores. Right? If you go to the gold sector, you own virtually nothing. Zero. Because the state has sold its interest in all the gold mines. And so, for instance, in 2022, whilst the state of Ghana earned about $6.8 billion from gold exploitation, countries like the UAE earned in excess of 23 billion from the gold that they got from Ghana. So evidently, you don't own the state. You don't own anything. So when you talk about GDP, I don't think that is a good measure. But even as I don't think that is a good measure, if you take the mid-year budget of Ken Ofori-Atta, or President Akufo-Addo as presented by Ken Ofori-Atta, they told us in the mid-year budget review that things have become difficult that they need to stop certain developments that were going on. Most constructions were stopped and halted. And so when you halt the spending, construction and other things, it means that you have halted spending, right? And when you halt spending, what it means is that the economy and its size is shrinking because no construction works are ongoing. Now, when the size of the economy has shrunk that much, you come and tell us that between the 6 months that your projected GDP growth of 1.5 has suddenly ballooned to 3.2. What is responsible for that? And so that is why I keep insisting that the propellers or triggers of the so-called GDP growth from 1.5 to 3.2 must be properly investigated. See, I can give you examples of construction sites. If you take the Obichebi-Lamte interchange, it's stalled. If you take the Junction Mall road all the way through to La, no work is ongoing. If you take the UPSA road, the contractor and everything has been moved out of sight. So there's no expansion.
The killer is a Dowenya stretch.
You understand? No work is being done. So how do you come and tell us that the economy is expanding when in fact you have restricted spending? Not only have you done that, many of the contractors have not been paid. So you are in deep arrears. Of course, when you are not paying people, when you don't pay contractors, you have stopped teachers and NAPCO workers, right? You are not paying them what they are due. Fire service workers have not been paid. Uniform allowances have not been given. And when you owe and you are not releasing the funds, you expect inflation to be artificially controlled. And so if you see a decline in inflation as the Minister for Finance and the statistics are projecting, it means that this is a deliberate artificial attempt to rest inflation. How come that food inflation is on the rise? Because nobody can do without food. Do you understand? So you see that it is food inflation that is still pushing because everybody has to consume in one way or the other. But when it comes to the other sectors, you have muscled and wrestled the figures, and therefore you see that there is a decline in inflation. But who says that when inflation is declining, it necessarily portends good news? Because if that inflation is not accompanied by productive investment, then it leads to massive unemployment. It's a basic economic principle that we must not run away from. And so evidently, there is something to interrogate about the figures even the Ken Ofurata budget has decided to put forward. And I think that once Likee is here, it's important that they go into the nitty-gritties and to check and to investigate the figures and to tell us what are the real triggers of the new economic growth or GDP growth that they are talking about. Now, I sit down and I weep. But I'm sure that Amma probably will elucidate a little more. There has been uproar about the levels of taxations in this country. And what did the Minister for Finance do? He came and did a Jack, where are you? I am here. And so they ran around the circle and come and tell us that they have offered 8 tax cuts or tax reductions. I give you a specific example. They say that there will be 0 rated taxes on sanitary pads produced locally. What does that mean in effect? Have they reduced the 20% luxury tax on sanitary pads? No. Have they taken any taxes away from the sanitary pads as they currently exist? No. So those taxes continue to exist until such a time that the local production capacity is able to support the production of locally manufactured sanitary pads. Then you can begin to say that there's no taxes on locally manufactured sanitary pads. Until then, we'll still be paying the normal taxes plus the 20% luxury taxes on the sanitary pads that are currently in circulation. So how is this paraded as if the call by civil society organizations, women groups, that you cannot classify sanitary pads as a luxury good. How is this a solution to their call? If it is not to come and throw sawdust into the eyes of the many Ghanaians. Because evidently, there is no tax reduction as far as sanitary pads is concerned. But the presentation in good English is made as if there is some reduction. And so everybody started singing Hosanna. But when you start to interrogate it, then you realize that, hey, this is embellished English that has no substance. That is the grand deception that we can place when we come to speak such flowery English, and we don't necessarily translate it into other things. The other aspect of the budget that I want further interrogation is that Ken Ofori-Atta came and said that they spent about 32.7 billion in keeping the lights on. And we should applaud them. But electricity, even as it's an expenditure, it's also an income, right? So if you spend 32.7 billion to keep the lights on, how much did you get in return? You don't pay lights here. You don't pay light bills. Because anytime the lights are turned on, somebody's expenditure is increasing. Industry's expenditure is increasing because you have to utilize the lights. And you pay. And when you are paying, you pay plus a margin to the electricity provider. So how come that they are able to tell us only of the expenditure component, and they are not telling us how much they raked by the generation of electricity or supply of electricity to the people? So you cannot talk about one side to the neglect of the other side. Electricity is an expenditure to the state. At the same time, it's an income because it gives out and it takes in. So it is important again to ask, when you gave money to turn on the lights, how much money did we get from the electricity tariffs that we raised, from the other components that we raised? Because every one of us pay electricity. If you don't pay electricity, we cannot be here doing the program that we are doing. And so it is not sufficient to come and tell us how much money was invested to keep the lights on, but it's also important to tell us how much was raised from that perspective. And so evidently, something is not adding up in the presentation of the budget, because it's like they are putting up what will make them feel good. The third point that I want to establish in this one is that they talked about job creation. About 2.4 million jobs were created. Where? I just want to know where. Apart from probably over the years, NAPCO, that they claim over 100,000 Ghanaian youth were put there. You can call it for internship. And even that, they told us that because it was more like an internship, they were going to be paid allowance of a flat rate of 700 Ghana cedis. And that allowance of 700 Ghana cedis will not attract taxes of any form, and it will not attract Senate contribution of any form. So at the end of the month, you were supposed to get 100,000, 700 Ghana cedis. Truth is that everybody that worked as a NAPCO employee received 699 Ghana cedis, not 700. You will take it that the 1 cedi is of no consequence. That is, if it is just 1 cedi out of 700 Ghana cedis, it's of no use. But we are talking about 1 cedi times about 100,000 people. So when you multiply that 1 cedi by the 100,000 people, it means that each month, somebody without doing any job earned 100,000 Ghana cedis. And in a year, 1.2 million Ghana cedis. Free money. Who was it that President Akufo-Addo mandated to be collecting this kind of bribe or corrupt money? Cheating the people, even the poor, have to be smuggled this amount of money every year. But assuming that it is NAPCO that you consider as part of the jobs, The NAPCO employees have been out of job for the past 11 months or so without being paid. So if you have not paid the people, how do you factor it as jobs? Particularly when you yourself have said that it is not full job. It is more or less like an intention. How do you factor such as jobs? Number two, you yourself came and stopped construction and other projects from going on because you needed to introduce what you call haircut and to begin to cut the size of government expenditure. So in doing so, there will be a diminished job in the system. How come that you are still telling us that after you have diminished the jobs, this is the number of jobs that you have created? And yet, when you look around, the question people ask is, "Ejumanu why?" Evidently, nothing of job creation has been done within the system. You see, I was surprised at Parliament when Kenufurata mentioned that government has provided 220 million to support the rehabilitation and resettlement, for that matter, relief efforts.
The 220 is only for relief.
For relief.
Yeah.
Relief efforts of the affected victims of the deliberate spilling of water at the Akosombo Dam. I call it deliberate spilling because this thing were foretold. When we were foretold that this was going to happen, VRA tells us today that they knew precisely the magnitude of devastation the spillage was going to have on the people. We have to set up an interministerial committee, and we only set up the ministerial committee after the havoc has been wreaked on us. Common sense. Common sense. You have been foretold that there is going to be disaster of this magnitude. And you wait when the disaster occurred, then you say that you have assembled a ministerial committee to go and do what? But you see, where I sit, Parliament has a lot of work to do. This 220 million, we will be told that they went and bought sanitary pads, and they will give a figure. We will be told that they went and bought water treatment tablets, and they will give a figure. We will be told that they even went and bought buckets and other things, and that will consume the entire 220 million. And what are we going to say? Because they will provide invoices, in some instances, honest checks. So they will spend the money that they themselves have said that they are going to give out. It is not the first time we are going through this. You remember COVID-19? They told us that they were going to insure frontline workers. And Ken Ofodata went and took a chunk of the money and gave it to Enterprise Insurance without issuing a single insurance certificate. And as we speak, Enterprise Insurance has the money and no beneficiary has been listed. So in this instance, when I saw that parliamentarians were saying that it is a good measure, I started asking myself whether these parliamentarians are also in the country under Akufo-Addo. Because if you are in the country called Ghana under Akufo-Addo's leadership, then you'll be mindful of the cavalier nature of Akufo-Addo and his Minister for Finance. That as they are telling us publicly that this is what they are giving for the society, they are privately collecting it for their self-growth. And so we should be worried about these things. Evidently, 2024 is going to be a very difficult year for majority of Ghanaians. As we speak, people are still struggling to be able to get their money from the domestic debt exchange that was imposed on them. There is even an attempt to impose another round of domestic debt exchange on them. As we are struggling today, trying to meet the expectations of the IMF, we are looking at our international creditors to get a haircut from them as well. So evidently nothing is working. Above all, this is the same budget that is going to spend more than the nation can generate, including what we are going to borrow. So if you are going to generate, including your borrowings and other targets, about 174 billion, and you are expected to spend in excess of 200 billion. That means that, look, Ama, you earn 100 cedis a month, and at the end of the month you are spending 150,000. What it means is that we are going to be in perpetual debt. We will not be able to overcome our difficulties. In the midst of this, there is no attempt whatsoever to reduce the size of government spending. No attempt whatsoever to reduce the size of government that will ensure that at least a certain level of relief will be brought onto the people of Ghana. So when the MPP come to tell us in the Akan language that 2024 budget is victory budget, I can assure you that 2024 is a disaster for the majority of the people of Ghana.
Thank you.